We have a forecast for cooler temperatures next week, but this week in Texas politics, things certainly got hot. How hot? Let's find out with our headlines from our panel. And Brian Smith with St. Edward's University, we'll begin with you. What's your headline?
As the legislature moves forward on immigration, school funding remains stuck in neutral.
Holly Hansen with the Texan News. Holly, what's your headline for the week?
Well, to paraphrase my colleague Brad Johnson, who nailed it this week, profanities, priorities, personalities, and Paxton.
And political business analyst Annie Spillman. What's your headline?
More state money for water, electric generators, parks, broadband is popular, poll finds.
Hillary Clinton is in Houston to help out Sheila Jackson Lee's mayoral campaign. We learned that next week Donald Trump will be in Houston for a campaign stop, as if Houston hasn't endured enough starting the week off by losing the American League Championship Series. Holly, who benefits from this Clinton-Trump visit to Houston? Anyone?
Well, I don't know. Clinton can be just as polarizing as Sheila Jackson Lee, although she is still popular amongst some Democrats, especially amongst women. However, I don't think it's going to be enough to help Jackson Lee get to that magic 50% she needs to win the Houston mayoral race. Her negatives are very high, according to a University of Houston poll that came out earlier this month. About 43% of likely voters say they would never consider voting for her. She's neck and neck with State Senator John Whitmire in the initial round, which includes 17 candidates. So we're likely looking at a runoff. In that runoff scenario, we do see John Whitmire running away with it. So whether or not a Clinton visit helps Jackson Lee, I really don't see it. You also combine that with the audio recording that dropped earlier this week of Jackson Lee berating young staffers in a profanity-laden tirade. That did not sit well with a lot of Houstonians, and she even lost some endorsements over it. As for Trump, I don't know who that benefits at this point. Certainly benefits Trump, perhaps. He's still popular amongst Texas Republicans. But it doesn't augur well that he's had a number of his team plead guilty in the recent days. And so, I don't know what happens with that one.
The top two candidates in the Houston mayoral race, Jackson Lee and John Whitmire, old school Democrats, a little different, but seriously just old school Democrats, their careers on the state and federal stages. Is this, Annie, a signal that another big city lost for progressives?
Yes, it may in local races, but keep in mind that progressives made some headway in congressional races in Austin and Dallas last year, namely Greg Casar from here in Austin, who probably realized his time wasn't going to be well spent in Austin on the local level. And while most Texas urban cities are blue, we saw just this spring that progressive issues on the ballot were resoundingly defeated in San Antonio and El Paso. So running ballot props like that ahead of mayoral races in Houston that we see coming up may be the true litmus test for progressive D success in Texas.
Brian, are these big blue cities turning purple?
I don't think so. I mean, the Houston race is nonpartisan, but all the front runners are self-identified Democrats. What we are likely seeing is the city becoming a lighter blue in this election. We saw this in Austin with Kirk Watson tracking to the center. And when issues like crime and budgets are on voters' minds, voters look away from that deep blue base for actual solutions. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing in Houston.
Republicans in the State House pushed through some very hard right bills this week, outlawing vax mandates by private business, as well as passing border bills to build more barriers and to allow local law enforcement to arrest and deport undocumented migrants. Annie, is there going to be some business pushback on this one?
Look, at this point, the business community, I think, is trying to stay out of the fray. Right now, there's so much embattlement, dissension, and emotion centered around these issues and stoked by fatigue. The vax mandate bill that directly affects private employers currently does not contain a private right of action. It'll likely go to conference committee where it'll be amended to sort of lower that administrative action against employers to a reasonable level that private employers can swallow. Really, right now, any good lobbyist is going to have concern that there are rifts among legislators that could create some potential stalemate moving forward. preventing their issues from passing at a later date in a regular session. And I think that's the true concern for the business community and really any industry.
Some emotional and heated statements during that State House debate by Democrats, Republicans digging in their heels. Brian, is this all pre-election theatrics, or is this something that the Democrats can use later, maybe on a statewide race?
This is certainly something the Democrats are going to use. It's going to provide them with two angles of opportunity. First is going to be that legal challenge that's going to happen before the ink is dry on the governor's signature. The second is going to try to take the photo ops from the border to back here to Texas, trying to counter that narrative. The problem for the Democrats, though, is they have these opportunities, but the images under the dome are fleeting, and November 2024 is a long way off.
Attorney General Ken Paxton keeps on parachuting into our weekly discussions. He did it in the debate in the House on Wednesday, showing up on the House floor during that heated debate. Speaker Phelan saying, "You're out of here. House rules don't permit you to be here." Caused somewhat of a little bit of an uproar on social media. Holly, a recent poll shows that even though he still has high negatives, he had a little bit of a bounce back from that acquittal in the Senate. So does he just keep on throwing punches?
Sure, I think so. So in the general matchup, he only has about a 23% approval rating amongst all likely voters, but amongst Republicans, he still touts a 50% approval rating. I do think that visit to the Texas House this week was a little bit of saber rattling. He has essentially declared war on Republicans who voted for impeachment, and as you said, we'll watch to see what happens in this primary season as voters maybe start to think a little bit more about policy. We did see the emergence this week of some individuals saying they're watching very closely to see how House members vote in the school choice policy issues and promise a primary challenge based on that. So we may see a shift away from the Paxton versus Phelan battle, but I think it will linger, at least to some extent, into the primary season.
What was this, Brian? A little bit of nose tweaking?
I think a lot of bit of nose tweaking. What he was doing is he was really trying to do a victory lap against the body that had impeached him. So I think he knew what he was doing, and he got a lot of airtime doing it.
Annie, it seems both Phelan and Paxton kind of got their shots in on that one, right?
Yes, but I agree with Brian. I think, Paxton's getting some airtime right now. He knows that this is really going to play well for his base, and he's riding that wave.
In the race for the Senate, Roland Gutierrez threw a Hail Mary pass of sorts with policy, pitching an immigration plan that includes new types of work visas and an amnesty plan. Brian, he's behind in a recent poll by UT. Is the primary over, or will the big undecided kind of bail him out here?
Yeah, I think it's too strong to say that it was a Hail Mary, but certainly right now he's trying to establish himself ahead of the pack on the immigration issue, and he's using his platform as a state senator and that current focus on immigration to try to get out there. He's still got a long way to go and not a lot of name recognition.
Anna, you said that the business groups were kind of standing a little back on the House fight here on the state level, but what's going on in the Senate fight with how are they lining up?
Well, look, first of all, in this primary race with Gutierrez and Allred, they've got voting records with the business community in their respective bodies. You can see how they've voted on business issues. For instance, I know that Allred on the federal level with NFIB on the small business voting record scored an underwhelming 40% on the federal side. And then Gutierrez on the state level on the small business record with NFIB scored a somewhat underwhelming 71%. So as far as the business community as a whole, necessarily can't speak for that, but I know that their voting records don't speak so highly for the small business community. And I think they have something to prove.
Holly, Brian didn't like my Hail Mary analogy. I liked my Hail Mary analogy. Is it a Hail Mary, this plan?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yes, it probably is. It's probably going to draw a lot of polarization in the media, and yeah, we'll see what happens with that one. I think that we're still going to see a pretty good, solid fight on the House floor as far as these issues go.
What about in that Senate race there? Is it over, or between the Democrats, do we feel like that it's going to be all red, or do you get a feeling that Gutierrez is a South Texas guy? Is Houston the key for him?
I don't know about that. I think, Allred just has so much more momentum going into this race that, I just don't see that really having a lot of an impact. But, there is that strong Hispanic push for someone who represents them and, the stance on border issues and so forth. I think that's going to be more of a problem for Allred.
This is a little bit off script, guys, but we got a situation up in Maine with the mass shooting. Does the mass shooting in Maine factor into the Senate race? Brian, what do you think?
We know that in 2018, guns and gun control were a big issue, especially because it related here to Texas. And we'll see what happens. I mean, it's far too common to see this, so it never really leaves as an issue.
Holly, Gutierrez's campaign, it was almost a one-issue campaign, gun reform, because of what happened in Uvalde. Now, because of what has happened in Maine, does that help him?
It may help him to some extent, but I still think a lot of Texans, they're very pro Second Amendment rights. And whereas there are concerns about, who has guns, I think that you're going to be opposed to any severe gun control measures. What they may be more interested in is, what are we doing about known criminals who have weapons? We have a problem in the state with felons in possession of a weapon. People have already been convicted of violent crimes being found to have weapons, and really most of the time getting a slap on the wrist until something more serious happens, as happened in Houston this past week, where we had an individual who was released as a felon in possession of a weapon on a $2,500 bond, and now he has been charged with capital murder. So I think that's going to be a bigger issue when we're talking about, gun violence in the state of Texas.
You agree with that, Annie, that maybe the Maine shooting turns it into a red flag discussion, and maybe that helps Roland?
Listen, I think Senator Gutierrez is going to definitely jump on this, but he might turn it into more of a mental illness discussion. There were obviously many hearings during the regular session discussing mental health issues, obviously the gun issue. He might have consultants that will talk about just what Brian was speaking about, how the speaking just to guns might not play well among the general base. So let's talk about mental health. Obviously, this person in Maine was already described as someone who was undergoing some mental health issues. So he might go that direction, and that might serve him a little bit better in Texas.
Staying with this Senate race, Senator Cruz has been talking a lot about school choice. This week he's down on the border with Senator Cornyn doing another tour. That seems to be pretty much all his playbook is, Holly. Do you expect any curveballs from him right now other than school choice and the border?
Well, to be fair, Senator Cruz is very vocal on a wide array of issues, everything from foreign policy to energy policy and pretty much everything in between. When you're talking about the border issues, recent polls indicate that is the number one concern of Texans. And on the school choice issue, polling indicates that bipartisan residents support school choice. So if Ted Cruz is using the bully pulpit, although he can't vote, of course, in the Texas legislature, he really is mirroring the concerns of a lot of Texans. And that, transcends the political divide there, especially when we look at that school choice issue. We see a lot of support amongst minority communities, and everybody's worried about border security. There's different policy proposals that they might argue about, but we're all concerned about public safety at this point in regards to the border.
A recent UT poll showed that the majority of people here in Texas do like the school choice idea, but when it comes to school safety, that goes higher. So how does that play with Cruz in selling? Do you agree with Holly that maybe he just stays on the border issues?
I think the border issue for him is what he knows best. It's sort of his his sort of hyperbolic narrative, so to speak. I mean, he's talked about it on the national level just recently. A day ending in Y if we weren't talking about the border. At this point, I think we've got more politicians down at the border than illegals, and I'm just making light. But Senator Cruz would do well to stick with what his colleagues are doing, and that's being part of the discussion when it comes to the border. And so he would be remiss if he sort of veered in a different direction. It's politics 101. Talk about what's being talked about right now, and that's the border.
Yeah, Brian, and the school choice issue really isn't universal in the discussion debate here in Austin, and it may not actually happen. So is it good to pivot back to the border for Cruz?
Yeah, I think Ted Cruz, like Annie was saying, he's going to campaign best when he stays on message, meaning going to Astros games, raising money, going to the border until the border doesn't work anymore. In 2018, O'Rourke brought the fight to Ted Cruz and was almost unable to seat him. Right now, no Democrats look like they're in a position to do this, and he shouldn't give them any reason to be.
Texas GOP Chairman Matt Ronal remains tangled up in a scandal involving a Texas PAC and a Nazi sympathizer. He's dodging questions pretty well about that, but in the meantime, he's attacking the House Speaker, continuing those attacks, and this week urging voters to reject all bond proposals on the November ballot. Holly, the Speaker has a primary challenger that Rinaldi supports. Is this race, this primary race, really about those two guys?
Think it's about those two guys. To be fair, this may be, as we talked about earlier, a speaker's race by proxy. The Republicans in the southeast part of Texas were already unhappy with Phelan over a number of issues, and his own county, the Republicans passed a censure resolution against him. So I think that they're concerned about his alliances with Democrats in the Texas House. But the realpolitik of it is that the speaker needs those coalitions if he's going to herd the cats that make up the House there. Whether or not it's really a Rinaldi Phelan thing, I think it's indicative of a broader civil war within the Republican Party as they fight over issues like school choice, alliance with Democrats, and some of these other polarizing issues. But with that will certainly be the primary race to watch in 2024 as far as the Texas House goes.
Dan Patrick kind of got pulled back, Brian, from this whole situation. How does this civil war play out?
Well, right now the Republicans are airing out all their dirty laundry, and candidates are positioning themselves for spring primaries and potential leadership positions. The advantage the Republicans have always had is even after nasty, ugly, divisive primaries, they've always united around that candidate. And even Ken Paxton has benefited from this. So if they don't do this, 2024 could be entirely different.
Do you see the Republicans coming back united after the Civil War, Annie?
Well, I think it's funny that we're all sort of using that term because that's what I came into this conversation thinking. There is a total faction happening in the Texas GOP, and I think that the primary in Speaker Phelan's race, among others across the state, those who have sort of been his alliance, the Speaker leadership, are just many battles in the Civil War that Rinaldi has cast in the Texas GOP. Do I see them coming together? I think we've got a long road ahead of us, and I think it's unfortunate because I think it's been a long time since the GOP has been this scattered.
Is it kind of interesting? There was a recent report from one of the networks talking about how the Republicans spent years beating down the Democrats, and now they're beating up each other, Holly. Where does this end?
Well, it's going to end with the primaries, hopefully. Republicans, if they want to win some general elections and maintain control in the Texas legislature, they're going to have to come together. I think that they will probably look to what happened in the U.S. House this week, and where you had finally a unification of Republicans to that elected body in the best interest of the country. I think once the primary battles are settled, you're going to see some more unification amongst Republicans. And they will do everything they can to retain control of what they already have control of.
Brian, you touched on this. Is there a Kumbaya moment? Has Congress really mended fences? Can the House GOP mend its fences here in Texas?
Well, I think for the Republicans, there almost has to be a kumbaya moment simply because they're going to have to also coalesce around whomever their presidential nominee is in fall 2024. And a divided Republican Party makes for easy Democratic pickups.
Annie, is civility dead?
It doesn't look bright right now, but you know what? We've come back from worse. So I'm hopeful about the future.
All right, let's wrap up this hot week in Texas politics with our one word. And Annie, we'll start with what's your word for the week?
Disorder.
Brian, what's your word for the week?
With Election Day on November 7th, my word is vote.
Holly, wrap it up for us.
Drama.
And with that, we're closing out another week in Texas politics.